Hey, I'm Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and today's question that every home buyer should ask is, should I rent or should I buy? And I'll just preface this video with, this isn't gonna be a 30-minute expose on all the pros and cons. It's not a conversation that you would really have, but, and if you wanna watch something like that, feel free to watch this one. And then if you want more, maybe go try to find something else on YouTube. But I think the value in this conversation is going to be more in the high level part of conversation about it. So as far as renting, why would you rent? I guess, right? That's the first question. Why would I rent? Okay, so think about that. Well, people rent because they can't afford to buy. They rent because they want flexibility, right? Maybe you moved here from a new area and you might be planning to be relocated pretty quick. Maybe you moved here for a year and you want to move somewhere else in a year. Doesn't really make sense to buy unless you were planning to hold on to it for the long term, right? And then you maybe you're new to the area, right? Maybe same situation, but you want to buy and live here long term, but you don't really know the area, so it might make sense to learn the area a little bit, explore neighborhoods. If you're new to Seattle, Seattle has a lot of different neighborhoods, and each neighborhood is quite a bit different. So it might make sense to explore the neighborhoods a little bit, familiarize yourself with Seattle. If you're a renter, usually you don't have to take care of maintenance issues. It's just a little less thought, right? You're not going to be spending as much money generally. There's the conversation about buying, and it's, oh yeah, you're throwing money away when you're renting. Well, when you buy, you have all these other expenses that you have to take into account. You don't have to pay property taxes when you rent. You don't have to pay interest on a loan when you rent. You don't have to fix the roof if it leaks. That's the owner's job, right? So there's definitely some pros and cons, right? That's maybe the pros of renting. And then, okay, well, what are the pros of buying a house? Well, if you buy a house, now you're buying something that can increase in value, right? You're taking that money that you would be putting towards rent. Maybe it's building equity in a house, right? And so something that you should know when you buy a house, your interest is amortized over a long time. So at the beginning, right? So on my own loan right now, I am paying down about $600 of what I pay every month is going towards I think it's actually more like $800. It's actually going towards principal. And then I've got another $1,600 that's going towards interest, right? So that could be your rent. Tax, my taxes, I'm paying another $500 in taxes every month, something like that, right? So there's a large chunk of the mortgage is taxes and interest. And some of that's deductible, things like that, right? So you can lower your tax burden. But think about that, right? That's your rent in the other place. So who's really throwing away money, right? That's the conversation you'd want to have, especially if you're thinking about a more fluid living situation, or maybe you're moving, right? There are pros, right? My house has also increased in value, right? And is worth well more than any of the interest that I've paid, right? And it's a lot more than my down payment, things like that. It's surprisingly easier to get into a house than you'd think. So there's a lot of situations where you can put down 5%, 10% down. You don't have to put 20% down to buy a house, and you can still have the similar loan qualification standards. The other things, with buying, you can go ahead and make changes to it. Those are common conversations conversations that I have with people, right? Getting a little tongue-tied there. They want to buy a house typically because they want to have a place they can call their own. They want to be able to fix it up and change things. They want to have a more permanent residence, and they know they plan to live here for the long haul. Some people want to start a family in the house. There's a whole host of reasons, right, for buying, and there's a whole host of reasons for renting. And I think for you, if I was in that situation, and when I was in that situation, right, you start to think, okay, what are the pros? What are the cons? And look at both of those. And I don't want to sit here and tell you that for you, buying is definitely the right decision. And I would never tell anybody that. But I do like to educate people on the pros and cons. And when we meet up, we have those conversations because I think it's really important. It's not always the right situation to buy. If you're planning to sell your house in a year, you need to know that as a home buyer, when you become a home seller, typically you have quite a bit of costs, right? So when you buy, you're going to have costs, and when you sell, you're going to have even more costs. You're going to be paying excise taxes, you're going to pay commissions, real estate agent commissions, generally speaking, unless you sell it yourself. So now you've kind of bought a house and paid some money to get in, usually that break-even point's a couple years, right? And in Seattle, that's more the norm. It's a quicker amount of time. But if you're in a different market, maybe it's 5-6 years. If you're buying a more expensive house, now all of a sudden it takes a lot longer to actually break even on this home purchase, where it actually made better sense to rent. So those are the kind of conversations I like to have with people. So there's not a exact science to that question. Should I buy? Should I rent? I definitely believe in real estate because I own it myself and I help people buy and sell all the time. But it's not always right for everyone. So if you're watching this video and you're feeling a pressure from somebody else, and I think I've talked about this in another video, if you feel like outside pressure, come on, you don't need to give in to that. There's those people usually mean well. Sometimes it's societal pressures too, and maybe it's not your parents, but it's just societal pressure. Hey, I'm getting to this age, I need to buy a house, and I'm married or have kids or whatever it is. I need to have a house. You don't need to. It's not a requirement. You can rent a house too if it makes better sense, right? So you have to weigh out the pros and cons. And again, you got to decide what's best for you in your situation. So should you rent? Should you buy? Both might make sense in a different situation, but you got to ultimately decide that for yourself.